Hello everyone, thank you for clicking on the Literacy Volunteers of Harrison County YouTube channel. We're a non-profit United Way agency. We would love for you to give us a thumbs up and like and share our videos. Today our video is on fungi. I haven't done a video on anything of the plant kingdom, so I was going to look first at fungi and then we'll go on to plants and then we'll look at animals. So fungi is a kingdom in and of itself, right? It's one of the five along with plants and animals and protists, and we can look at all of the five kingdoms if you'd like in a different video. It includes some of the most important organisms both in terms of their ecological and their economic roles within our environment. They break down dead organic materials. They're what's called decomposers, right? If we compose something, we put it together, right? You write music but if we decompose, we're taking it apart. So what they do is they break down all of the dead organisms so that we can reuse them. And we're going to look at what we reuse from dead organisms. Most vascular plants have a symbiotic relationship with them. Remember, we've talked about symbiotic relationships before, meaning same life. Right? They're helping each other. So they inhabit the roots underneath of trees or vascular plants, and they give nutrients to those trees and vascular plants. What that's called is an endomycorrhizal association. If you see this mycorrhizal, that has to do with a fungus every time. And we're not going to look really at the reproductive cycles of fungi. That's more of a deep biology subject. They also provide us with numerous drugs, including penicillin and other antibiotics. Penicillin, most people know, comes from bread mold, and so mold is a fungus. Foods like mushrooms, truffles, and morels, a lot of these we see around here. People go out and pick mushrooms and eat them. You should never go out and just pick a mushroom and eat it because you don't know what it is. And then truffles, those are the ones that the pigs smell out, and then morels, they look like little trees, right? And then I was going to give this example, which we'll come back to in a little bit, is of a yeast. We use yeast when we make bread, when we make champagne, when we make beer. And what we use it for is its fermentation properties, or this fermentation process. And we'll look at that in a little bit. They also cause a number of plant and animal diseases. In humans, we can get ringworm, that's a fungus. Athlete's foot, that's a fungus. And a lot of other different fungi. Plants get what are called rusts or smuts. Those are fungal infections that could kill the plants. Let's look at their role as decomposers. Most of them are decomposers, what are called saprotrophs. If you break this word down, we've looked at troph before, like heterotroph, autotrophs. Troph means to eat. Sapro means rotten. So essentially they're eating rotten things, decomposing, things that are already dead, they're already rotten. They are the only decomposers that can break down wood and cellulose in plant cell walls. Cellulose is made up of glucose all hooked together, and we looked at glucose as a byproduct of photosynthesis, and this makes up plant cell walls, which gives them their rigidity, right, and their structure. So we have this tree and it's growing in the dirt, and there's its roots, there's its leaves, and as this tree grows, especially around here, they lose their leaves, right? So this green leaf falls to the ground, and some of these leaves that fall into the ground can be eaten by worms or other animals or insects. So here's a little worm that's eating this leaf, right? So, and once that's eaten, what happens is with that dead organic material, those nutrients leach into the soil by a chemical action, meaning they soak in, right? They leach into it. And if that doesn't happen, then we get this little leaf that falls to the ground. If it's not eaten by a worm or an animal, these partially consumed leaves get attached to this fungi, right? And bacteria, and they become what's called detritus or leaf litter. And they're dead leaf products. So here are a couple of fungi that are feeding off of this decomposing this dead leaf. Or we can get further decomposition by earthworms, like fishing worms that you all see, bacteria, soil mites, fungi. Any of those things all go back into making our organic, rich soil. And when we're going to look at what makes that rich, what makes you want to plant, and then in turn, why do these plants grow well in this type of soil, right? Okay. The action of that fungi, when it's decomposing that dead leaf or whatever dead material, it's going to release these two elements, nitrogen and phosphorus. 78% of our atmosphere is made of nitrogen. It's a very important element, right? And so what they do is they release those from that decaying matter into the soil where other organisms can use them. This makes our soil very rich with nitrogen and phosphorus. Fungi degrade large insoluble molecules by producing a variety of coenzymes. These enzymes sort of eat the molecules or break the molecules down. They're released into the substrate, that's whatever something's laying on, or they remain bound to the outside of the fungal cell wall, right? So we have these large molecules, we break them down into small molecules, and these protein carriers carry them into the cells, which help all of our plants, right? Reaction is dependent upon water. This reaction is dependent upon water. That's why we find fungi in moist environments. In the desert, where it's hot and dry all the time, you don't find many fungi. But if you go here, we've talked about temperate deciduous forest, you'll find a lot of different types of fungi. The rainforest even more, because of that moist environment where that fungi thrive in, right? They have to, because this reaction is driven by that water. Here are some fungi facts. The word fungus comes from the Latin word for mushrooms, and that's what we typically call them. You don't call them fungi, typically. More than one fungus or fungi, right? In Latin, we drop the US and add the I. Eukaryotes, right? We've talked about that before. These are just cells that have a membrane-bound nucleus. So they aren't like bacteria. Remember, bacteria did not have a membrane-bound nucleus. They do. Scientists have identified about 100,000 species, but they think that's only a fraction of the 1.5 million species that are present on Earth. They're more closely related to animals than they are to plants. They cannot photosynthesize, right? They can't take the sun and make their own food. They multiply sexually, asexually, or both. And the both is a whole big, long discussion that we won't go into called alternation of generations, and it's like a moss, and there are a bunch of gametophyte, sporophyte words that we don't know. So one day maybe we'll look at mosses and we'll talk about alternation of generations. They often interact with other organisms and they form these beneficial mutualistic associations. I will show you some pictures that will be along with this video on what are called lichens. If you're walking around in the woods around here on the trunks of trees, you see those green, kind of looks like paint on the trunks of trees. Those are a combination, a symbiotic beneficial mutualistic association between a fungus and an alga. So the alga photosynthesizes and the fungus decomposes. But it's just a little association, and that's called a lichen, and I'll show you some pictures of those. The usefulness, right? We're going to look again at that yeast I talked about in the beginning. We use it to leaven. That's what we call leavened bread. Molds are used to ripen things like blue cheese. If any of you eat blue cheese, it kind of has that pungent smell and that acrid taste. That's from the blue cheese, right? And then those molds, they produce antibiotics also, like penicillin. So our example is yeast. Everyone's heard of yeast, right? Because we've all heard of bread. We all know people that bake bread or buy bread at the store. It's single-celled fungus. These are called, the name of the fungus are Saccharomycetes, and you don't need to know that. Sacro kind of means sugar, right? When you see myces like this, that means fungus. So that we can look at. But the yeast will digest sugar to obtain energy. So we have different forms of sugar that this yeast will digest. I've told you before, anytime you see OSE on a word, it means sugar. So sucrose, that's beet or cane sugar, right? And fructose and glucose, things like honey or molasses. And maltose is starch that's in flour. We find starch in flour because flour is a plant product. So how does that happen? It's a process called alcoholic fermentation. We get alcoholic because one of the products is ethyl alcohol. So it's alcoholic fermentation. It also produces carbon dioxide gases. So when we put that into the dough to leaven it, you set it on put warm water, can't be cold water, has to be warm. Remember, we've talked about we have to have the heat for this process to occur. And then that yeast starts to multiply within that dough, and these byproducts of this reaction, this carbon dioxide gas and this ethyl alcohol can't escape. So it causes that dough to expand and to rise. That's what we're looking for in our bread. The ethyl alcohol produces, that gives that bread that distinct aroma that we all like when we smell it when it's baking, and the flavor of bread. So these two byproducts of this alcoholic fermentation help to raise the bread and help to give the bread its flavor, right? There are two pathways for ATP production in alcoholic fermentation. We have glucose, there's our sugar, and it goes through what's called glycolysis, and we get pyruvate. We get ATP, energy production, here, and it can go two ways. We can go toward the acetaldehyde way, where we get the ethanol, which is ethyl alcohol, we've looked at this way. Or we can also go to get acetyl coenzyme A, and we get the carbon dioxide. So once we ferment whatever sugar it is we're looking for, then we can get these beneficial byproducts that help us. So you can see there are many ways that fungus help us and also hinder us, good things and bad things, in our ecosystem. And we will show you some pictures and some videos of these along with this, and we hope that you give it a thumbs up and that you subscribe to our channel. Thank you.